Now the Meta Quest 3 is a pretty solid option for anyone who wants to bugger about in VR without spunking huge amounts of cash on an expensive gaming rig. Although at the time I shot this video, the Quest 3 will still set you back just over £400, so it ain't exactly cheap. But don't worry if you're just a wee bit too skint or just plain tight, because you can save yourself a bit of cash by grabbing yourself the fresh new Meta Quest 3S instead. In fact, the S bit might even stand for skint. Pretty confident that's the case. Now, this standalone VR helmet trims out just a couple of the more frivolous features of the Meta Quest 3 to bring the price down to a more palatable 289 GBPs or $299. So that's more money for precious booze, huzzah! So let's have a good old squint at the Meta Quest 3S and see how it stacks up against its more wallet pummeling sibling. And for more on the latest and greatest tech, please do subscribe and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! So first, a quick unboxing, and then I'm going to spend a good few days with the Quest 3S to get to know it. Alright, so what have we got? We've got ourselves one Meta Quest 3S headset, of course. We've got ourselves a pair of controllers. We've got a specs spacer. You've actually got yourself a power adapter, as well as the USB-C charging cable, which is pretty rare these days. And also, in case you don't know what you're doing, you've got a quick start guide in there as well, and that's everything that's bunged in the box. Now, setup takes roughly 5 minutes as usual, and it's so simple that even a Geordie could manage it after 50 pints of Nuki Brune. Basically, just download Meta's app onto your phone, sign in. It's not really much more complicated than that. You've got to watch a whole bunch of videos on how to use the thing, but thankfully you can skip through a few of them now. And the design of this shiny white helmet hasn't changed up too much from the Meta Quest 3. Here's the 3 on the left and the more budget-friendly 3S on the right. The most obvious and most significant difference is that the Meta Quest 3S is considerably more chonky than the more expensive effort. And that is apparently because it uses a Fresnel lens setup rather than a pancake lens setup like the Meta Quest 3. So it's a similar system to the old Meta Quest 2, hence just as thick. But the good news is the Meta Quest 3S basically weighs the same as the Meta Quest 3, just over half a kilo, and thanks to the secure fit and the generous padding around the facial region, just as comfortable to wear for, an hour, 2 hours at a time. And it's the exact same strap system as the Oculus Quest 3 here on the 3S. So just slip it over your bont and then you can tighten it or loosen it just by sliding these two wee bits along. So while the obvious chonkiness aside, it's hard to moan about the Meta Quest 3S's design. It's another shiny, comfy white helmet. Unfortunately, the white design does mean they get marked up rather easily, so don't expect the 3S to look quite as pristine in a few months' time. And yeah, Meta can't work miracles, so you will indeed still look like a complete bellend when you're prancing about your living room with this thing strapped to your face. Now, like the Quest 3, this shiny VR headset once again sports a pair of RGB cameras up front. So the Quest 3S can reproduce your surroundings in glorious colour when you're dossing about in the UI, same as the Quest 3. And you can also choose to use this as a backdrop in some apps like Les Mills. Quite handy for making sure you don't accidentally punch the living shit out of your wardrobe or your gran while you're doing your workout. Got the same Meta Store as always for your apps and games with full compatibility. And that's because the Meta Quest 3S is powered by the very same Snapdragon XR2 Gen 2 chipset with the very same 8GB of RAM stuffed inside as the Meta Quest 3. So yeah, the performance here on the Meta Quest 3S is usually excellent. I have seen a couple of dropped frames in titles like Pistol Whip and the Les Mills Body Combat these past few days. We are talking very rare instances of slight performance drops, slight frame rate stammer. Mostly everything runs nice and smooth, even the most demanding fare out there like Asgard's Wrath 2. And since the Meta Quest 3 has already been around for a while, quite a few of those older VR games have been upgraded to take full advantage of Qualcomm's crotch-tingling power, boasting high-res textures and some rather smashing lighting effects, while the most recent titles also serve up slick, crispy visuals. And for more on the actual games, we'll definitely check out my roundup of the best titles you could bag yourself for the Meta Quest 3 and the 3S. I have concentrated on solo single-player titles rather than multiplayer shenanigans, just in case, like me, you've got no mates. Now, if you bag yourself the cheapest version of the MetaQuest 3S, that comes with 128 gigs of storage, which is pretty good, although some of the biggest, beefiest games on that Meta Store will eat up a good chunk of that. The likes of Asgard's Wrath, I believe, is just over 30 gigs by itself. Thankfully, most of them come in around the sort of 3, 4, 5 gig mark, and let's face it, most of these games, they'll last you a few hours at most, and then once you finish them, you can just wipe them off there, install some fresh stuff. You can always reinstall those games again at a later point. It's not like you lose them or something. Otherwise, if you do have a bit of spare extra cash, you can upgrade the MetaQuest 3S. You can double the storage to 256 gigs. It's not quite as generous as the MetaQuest 3, where you can upgrade it to half a terabyte. As for the controllers, well, they're basically exactly the same as the MetaQuest 3 controllers, which I'm certainly happy about because they're comfortable to clutch with their ergonomic design, nice and lightweight as well. You've got the same button layout, the same responsive joysticks, the same triggers as well, so you can clutch stuff or shoot in-game. And each controller is powered by a single AA battery. As usual, you can just pop off the side of the controller, replace the battery with another one. When it's dead, you get warnings long in advance of them being completely dead as well, which is quite helpful. And you can buy a rechargeable battery pack which replaces that AA battery if you buy yourself the charging dock. And the controller tracking works in much the same way. You've got 4 VGA cameras which help to map out exactly where those controllers are as you're waggling and waving them about the place. As you can see, they're slightly different layouts to the original MetaQuest 3 though. And I have found in the original MetaQuest 3, if I'm waving my arms really fast, like in a stupidly intensive Les Mills workout, then sometimes the tracking can go rather awry, shall we say, or completely bollocks up, to put it in a less polite manner. Whereas here on the MetaQuest 3S, I haven't had the same experience. A couple of times it has lost track of a controller very briefly if the lighting's been a bit cack, but generally, as long as the room is well lit, then not a problem. And yes, the hand tracking isn't too bad either, although as usual, it is more awkward than just using the controllers, especially if you're trying to type something out, which is rather fiddly. Kind of feels like that moment at 3 in the morning when you're 20 Jaegers deep and desperately trying to send a take me back begging email to your ex. And so far, so very familiar, and at this point in the review you might be wondering to yourself, how is it that the MetaQuest 3S is significantly cheaper than the MetaQuest 3? Well, the answer is the more basic display tech that's crammed into this bright white face furniture. You see, this VR headset sports a similar single LCD setup to the older MetaQuest 2, rather than a pair of separate screens which help to boost the resolution like the MetaQuest 3. And the field of view has also narrowed somewhat on the MetaQuest 3S compared with that MetaQuest 3. So the horizontal field of view is now 96 degrees rather than 110, while the vertical FOV has been squished from 96 degrees to 90. And yeah, this does slightly impact the sense of immersion when you're exploring a virtual environment, because it kind of feels like you're viewing everything through a space helmet, which isn't too far off the truth, but yeah. And that resolution drop means you won't be able to fully appreciate the sharper visuals in those meta games that are designed to take advantage of the Snapdragon XR2 Gen 2. Those graphics are still pretty good. We're not talking, everything being a pixelated affair here. The likes of Asgard's Wrath 2 still looks stunning. Not that you'll have much time to look around and really appreciate the visuals. There's some whopping great snake serpent things trying to take your bloody head off with a scimitar. And the visuals are still pleasingly poppy in the likes of Pistol Whip. As for the audio, well, that is still spaffed straight into your lugs via a pair of speakers which are just housed on the sides of the strap here. And yes, this open design does mean you get a lot of audio bleed into whatever room you're sat in. So if you're there on the sofa enjoying your bit of VR gaming right next to your other half who's watching a bit of Love Island, Don't Tell the Bride, whatever other classy bits of TV they like, they're not going to be too impressed. Of course, you do have full Bluetooth support if you want to get some wireless buds or something paired up. But I really like those built-in speakers. They deliver a powerful and immersive stereo effect, easily good enough for enjoying games, movies, whatever you fancy. And at any time while you're gaming, you can quickly and easily adjust the volume just by poking this wee volume rocker, housed just on the bottom edge of the headset. As for the battery life, well, despite being a chunky fella, the MetaQuest 3S actually packs in a slightly smaller capacity battery versus the MetaQuest 3. But don't despair, kiddies, because the more basic display here on the MetaQuest 3S means that the battery life is actually just as good, if not a wee bit better, than the MetaQuest 3. You'll still be able to enjoy just over 2 hours of hot VR gaming action from a single charge of that battery, which, to be fair, is about as long as you'll want to get out of a single session anyway before you start to go all cross-eyed and get a horrific migraine. And in fact, with mixed use or messing around in some of the VR apps, like streaming some YouTube, things like that, as well as the game, and you'll actually get closer to around 2.5 hours of use from a single charge, so not bad at all. You can always spunk up a bit of extra cash on battery pack straps and other fancy pants stuff like that as well if you do want to keep on gaming all afternoon long. Just beware that you might lose your lunch. And there you have it, my lovelies. That is my full final frank review of the MetaQuest 3S VR helmet. And I've got to say, I'm really happy to see this more budget-friendly MetaQuest 3S option emerge, which offers up the same full-fat performance as the MetaQuest 3. It means that more people will be able to jump on board with a bit of VR action in a standalone fashion, so you don't have to spunk up all that extra cash on a crazy expensive PC rig or anything like that. You won't be missing out on any of the freshest titles to hit that Meta store because you've got the same performance and everything, so all good. However, do bear in mind that the MetaQuest 3 has actually been discounted a fair bit recently in various online sales, so if you are put off slightly by the more basic display tech here in the MetaQuest 3S, you might want to hang on, see if you can get this thing at a reduced price. Probably over Christmas it'll drop again. So that's what this ball northern twat reckons of the MetaQuest 3S. It'd be great to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Please do poke subscribe and ding that notifications bell for more on the latest and greatest tech. Check out that best MetaQuest games roundup video that I was banging on about earlier. If you stick around a few seconds, I'll hopefully have it in a little shortcutty fashion in the sort of end credity bit. Have yourselves a bloody wonderful rest of the week. Cheers everyone, love you!